They test it out, give us feedback on the process. Sometimes you'll just release it and wait for the feedback to come. How do you make that kind of decision? How much do you involve your users in how the product is shaped?
To be honest, this has been something that we've learned over time, and the world has evolved over time to be more social over the last few years. So the amount that we involve users has in fact increased over the last few years. First, with Kosmix, we didn't actually involve users that much in terms of determining exactly what it's going to be. But when we did our second product, Meetup, it's very different. We put out an early version of the product. We have product managers who are constantly on Twitter and Friendfeed, listening to what people are saying, and we get a lot of responses to those channels, and sort of responding to them, and also prioritizing new features based on the feedback that they're getting. Now that said, I think this can also be taken too far. So if you listen too much to what your early users are saying, you kind of get into a groupthink kind of mode where you don't have a clear vision of what needs to be done. And I think in all these things, you sort of use what users are saying, with all due respect, as data points that guide you to build your vision of where you need to be. And and no user, I think, wants a product that's built by a committee of users. They all want a product that's built by somebody with a clear vision. And they're okay sometimes if you say what they're suggesting, it's not on the roadmap now, it can be done later, or it just doesn't fit with what. I think people respect you more for staying true to your vision, as Facebook has demonstrated, and as Apple has demonstrated periodically. So I think it's important to listen to users and use their information. Don't ignore it, but don't do everything that they suggest.
Thank you guys. Chris, you guys kind of have development by committee with you.
Yeah, except we don't. I think I'd echo almost everything Anand said, because everything we do is open. So if you want to be involved in our engineering meetings or internal marketing meetings and so on, they're all open. They're open calls. All the notes are on the internet, which is actually the internet, sorry. But exactly the same thing. Like, we do not do design by committee. We do not vote on what the user interface should be, because that rarely works. So we still need to exercise leadership and assert vision, but also figure out how to engage our users and talk to them and recognize the biases that are inherent in who you're talking to. So the set of people that are going to respond to when you post a brand new user interface are likely, very tech savvy, early adopters, and you just need to recognize that as you consider that feedback. And then the challenge is getting out, when you go to new ideas, into your new targets. When you go to more mainstream consumers, how do you get to more mainstream consumers, and how do you get that feedback and have those voices heard in the development process as well?
Yeah, I kept on thinking about the Simpsons episode where Homer gets to design a car, and it ends up with 100-ounce cup holders and costs like $200,000 by the end of it, and that is sort of the outcome when if you just do everything users say. And I think at the end of the day, your goal is to create something your users will love to use, not something that not to do everything that they say. And those two things are very related, but not the same thing. And I think that part of in terms of deciding how to launch, a new user interface or some significant change to your product, I think the most important thing is to instill the community of users who use your product with a sense of ownership over that change. So if it's dramatic and you're going to do it, you need to make sure the message is not disingenuous. You don't want to make it appear like an option, but then force it on your users. But you also don't want to startle them. So it's really sort of a sensitive issue, particularly if you're doing dramatic changes to your product. But I think as long as you're honest with your user base, I think people are surprisingly understanding, and particularly if they're invested in your brand and your product, they will likely appreciate why you're going in the direction that you're going.
And if you remember that Simpsons episode, Bart, his son, loved the car. And went back to his dad at the very end and said, "I thought your car was pretty cool."
Yeah.
So that's important. So we got two more questions before we get off to the Q&A. So I want to ask one question. You guys have done other companies. You've worked other places. You've had very little success. How much do you learn from the past, and how much do you say, you know what, it's a whole new ball game doing what I'm doing? How much do you leverage the past, or how much do you look at the situation changing? So, I think it's, once you
if you watch a lot of episodes like of Seinfeld, like me, you get to a point where, for every situation that comes up in life, you can think of a Seinfeld moment that kind of goes with it. And sort of having a lot of experiences is a little bit like that. And I worked with some really great people, and I've been in some terrific situations. And sometimes it's hard for me to resist comparing the current situation to something that has happened in the past, or thinking of a quote from Jeff Bezos, who had the privilege of working with Amazon, how he would have dealt with similar situations. So, it's a blessing and a curse, I think, because it's a blessing because in many cases you know the obvious wrong things to avoid, and then you sort of learn some important lessons along the way. For example, one of the most important lessons I learned about startups, both as a founder and as an investor, having seen many startups blow up as well as succeed, is the importance of founder chemistry, the chemistry between founders, and how that is very often the most underrated risk factor in a startup, both by investors and by founders. And this sort of comes to the fore when things really get tough, and you don't really realize something like this until you've done it a couple of times, and until you've seen a couple of startups blow up because of the problem. So some things like this. At the same time, you sort of lose a certain amount of naivety, which I think is kind of important when you're doing a startup. I think you sort of don't do certain things because you're very sure that that's the wrong thing to be doing, and it's going to fail. And that very often you miss some really important opportunities because of that. And this has happened to me personally. And so it's sort of you need to. So it's a mixed blessing to have a long track record and to sort of have a lot of experience to draw upon. Sometimes you miss big opportunities because of that experience, but usually it comes in handy.
I actually worry that I'm becoming too experienced sometimes, because that's why I'm such a big supporter of things like Y Combinator, because I think it's a great quote. I actually still have never been able to find out who said it. I think it was a venture capitalist, but he was going up to one of his firms, who was failing to a competitor, and he said, "Why were they able to do this thing and you were not able to do it?" He said, "Well, they were too naive to know it couldn't be done." And I think that's true of so many really disruptive technologies, is they're done by people who aren't jaded by experience, and they really try to do truly amazing and ambitious things. And that level of naive ambition, I think, is something that people undervalue. I think people value experience a little too much in the grand scheme of things. So I really value my experience. I mean, using page load times on Friendfeed are fast. I was brainwashed at Google, and I just can't make slow page loads. It's just something goes off in my head. But at the same time, I think that we have to untrain ourselves from a lot of things. Without Friendfeed, my main priority in building a company at Friendfeed is a focus on execution. I want us to be able to push out changes. We do at least 4 pushes a day. And we do that because I don't want stale code. If someone has an idea, I want it out there, and I want to see statistics on how people are using it. And that type of chaos is not something that would probably go over as well in a large company like Google. But so that to me, I would have to untrain some of my experience. So I don't know. I love young entrepreneurs. I think are by far the most likely to do the most interesting and disruptive things. They'll probably make a bunch of mistakes on the way, but in the grand scheme of things, mistakes aren't that costly. It's not doing interesting things. It's the most likely reason to fail.
Yeah. So I don't think in my experience, you can't replay what I've done in the past. I think, as you guys have said, take lessons from your past and bring them to your future. So things like, we have very fast release cycles in order to iterate quickly. We hire, I try to hire people that are smarter than I am, and little things like that do our little tricks. But if you have